July 23, 1999. Springfield Township, Delaware County, Pennsylvania. 9-year-old Abigail Whitaker left home with a blue ribbon in her hair, clutching a children's Bible and a homemade muffin her mother had wrapped in foil. She waved goodbye, crossed Baltimore Pike, and walked toward Faith Hill Chapel, just 3 blocks away. Hours later, that same Bible was found deep in the woods near Ridley Creek State Park, its leather cover torn. The words, "God's love is safe," scrawled across a note card in a child's handwriting. Her pink backpack lay half buried in the leaves, but Abby was gone. The quiet community of Springfield turned upside down overnight. Neighbors who once shared prayers and potlucks now searched the woods with flashlights, whispering questions they were afraid to say aloud. Every door was locked. Every face, familiar or not, looked suspicious. For 22 years, her case went cold, until a forgotten diary, a single strand of hair, and a name long trusted brought the truth clawing its way back from the past. So, what really happened to the little girl with the blue ribbon? And how did the man who led the prayers become the monster who tore a town apart? I've spent hours piecing this story together for you, those who still believe that justice, no matter how late, still matters. They said no one would subscribe for stories like this, but I believe people like you will. Tell me, where are you watching from tonight? If you care about forgotten cases, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell, because together, we make sure their voices are never silenced again. Delaware County, Pennsylvania, summer 1999. In the quiet suburb of Springfield Township, the morning began like any other, cloaked in the ordinary calm of a small American town. The sun crept over the neat rows of houses lining Baltimore Pike, painting the world in gold and pink. Already the air shimmered with the promise of heat, and the scent of cut grass mingled with the sweetness of blooming hydrangeas in front yards. Inside the modest white house on Springfield Road, Carolyn Whitaker moved through her morning rituals with practiced ease. She poured orange juice, checked her watch, then glanced at the photo frames lining the kitchen wall. Family portraits, Thomas in his Boeing work shirt, Abby grinning with a missing tooth, Last Christmas by the tree, Caroline herself in a flour-dusted apron. Normalcy, security, everything seemed in its place. Upstairs, 9-year-old Abigail "Abby" Whitaker tied a blue ribbon into her hair, her fingers nimble with anticipation. She chose her favorite dress, white with navy polka dots, and slipped on scuffed pink sneakers. Her backpack, light but precious, was waiting by the door. Inside, a small children's Bible with a cracked leather cover, a carefully wrapped muffin from the night before, and a colored pencil for doodling between lessons. Abby moved through the hallway, sunlight flickering through the windows, her mind buzzing with thoughts of the day ahead. Faith Hill Chapel's summer Bible school program had become the centerpiece of her summer. She loved the crafts, the stories, the warmth of the church basement, and most of all, the sense of belonging. Today, Mrs. Rachel, the kindly Sunday school teacher, had asked Abby to come early and help set up chairs for the morning's lesson. It made her feel important, grown up in a small but significant way. Before she left, Abby paused in the kitchen doorway, watching her mother frost cupcakes for the bakery. "I'll be early today. Mrs. Rachel needs help setting up chairs," she called out with the uncontainable cheerfulness of childhood. Caroline looked up, a smile breaking through her gentle exhaustion. "Be careful crossing the street, sweetheart," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. The warning had become routine, a reflex in a world that mostly felt safe. Abby nodded, then dashed out the door, the screen banging shut behind her. She breathed in the morning air, heavy with the scent of honeysuckle, and started down the familiar sidewalk. The neighborhood was waking up. Somewhere a lawnmower rattled to life, a dog barked at a passing jogger, and the postman's truck idled at the corner. Abby clutched her Bible, the cool leather comforting in her small hand. A few houses down, Mr. Jacob Turner, an elderly neighbor tending his rose bushes, waved at her. Abby offered a bright, "Good morning," as she passed, her energy infectious even at this early hour. Turner watched her for a moment, noting the determined stride, the way she glanced both ways before approaching the crosswalk at the end of the block. Baltimore Pike was busier than most mornings, commuters in their sedans, delivery trucks rattling past. Abby waited patiently, as her mother had taught her, then crossed when the light changed, her ponytail bouncing with each step. On the other side, she walked past the faded sign for Ridley Creek State Park, the wooded entrance looming cool and green beneath the sun. To the left, Faith Hill Chapel rose up in whitewashed brick, its steeple stark against the sky. Abby's heart fluttered with anticipation. She could already hear children's laughter echoing through the open church windows, the high notes of a piano drifting from the rec room. But the world, for all its familiarity, was full of unseen turns. Abby didn't notice the dark green Chevrolet sedan idling by the side of the road, sunlight flashing off its chrome emblem. She barely glanced at the car. After all, this was Springfield, a place where everyone knew each other, where kindness was as predictable as the seasons. She was only a block from the chapel, close enough to see Mrs. Rachel setting out plastic cups of lemonade on a folding table. The grass was damp with dew. The scent of lilacs drifted over the churchyard fence. Abby walked faster, eager to arrive, her backpack thumping against her side. She never noticed the way the car door eased open, nor the shadow that moved swiftly, deliberately, along the edge of the park. To Abby, it was just another morning in her safe, sun-dappled town, a day full of promise, of songs and lessons and friendship. But as the clock in the Whitaker kitchen crept toward 9, and Caroline glanced once more at the phone, unease flickered in her chest. At Faith Hill Chapel, Mrs. Rachel scanned the growing crowd of children, her eyes searching for the polka-dot dress and blue ribbon that always seemed to arrive first. The ordinary day shifted, almost imperceptibly, into something else. By mid-morning, worry had begun to creep through the neighborhood, curling into the edges of every conversation. Abby Whitaker, bright, beloved, and full of life, had vanished, and Springfield Township, in the blink of an eye, would never be the same. What really happened that morning? That was the question that would echo, unanswered, through the years to come. On the edge of Springfield Road, the Whitaker family's house stood shaded beneath an old maple tree, its roots winding beneath the sidewalk, as if anchoring the home to a patch of earth that promised safety. Yet, as the hours after Abby's disappearance stretched on, every detail of the neighborhood took on a new significance. Each neighbor's routine, every familiar car, all the little rituals that made up the heartbeat of Delaware County. Thomas Whitaker, Abby's father, was a man shaped by discipline and routine. For 17 years, he'd worked as a mechanical engineer at Boeing Ridley Park, rising before dawn to assemble his lunch, iron his shirt, and slip quietly out the door to beat the morning traffic. His colleagues respected his precision and calm. His neighbors knew him as the dad who mowed the lawn on Saturdays and fixed squeaky fences for free. Thomas's sense of order was the backbone of his family's world. But now, with Abby missing, his carefully ordered life began to tilt, as if the earth beneath his feet was suddenly unreliable. Caroline Whitaker was the kind of mother who remembered everyone's birthday and whose kitchen always smelled of fresh bread. She ran a small bakery from their home, providing cupcakes and pastries to the local shops. Her mornings spent kneading dough and her afternoons arranging treats in neat white boxes. She volunteered at Faith Hill Chapel, running bake sales, teaching Sunday school, and comforting neighbors through life's sorrows. Carolyn believed in the goodness of people, in the warmth of a shared table, in the quiet power of community. Now that warmth felt threatened. Every minute Abby was gone, Caroline's hope frayed a little more at the edges. Their home, like many in the area, was modest but full of life. Faded wallpaper in the hallway, family photographs on every surface, Abby's drawings taped proudly to the refrigerator. Out back, a worn swing set creaked in the breeze. On the porch, a potted fern hung lopsided, watered faithfully by Abby each afternoon. Inside, the air was thick with the hush of absence, as if even the walls themselves held their breath. Springfield Township itself was a picture of small-town America, where everyone nodded hello, where block parties filled the streets each 4th of July, where secrets were rare and trust was currency. But underneath the well-tended lawns and waving flags, there were always stories, ones whispered on porches at dusk or kept close to the heart, surfacing only when the world tilted off its axis. Faith Hill Chapel was the community's anchor, its white spire visible from almost every corner of town. The chapel's summer Bible school program was beloved, drawing children from all backgrounds to its cool basement for crafts, songs, and stories of hope. On Sunday mornings, the sanctuary filled with sunlight, and the air rang with laughter, hymnals, and the soft creak of pews. In that sanctuary, generations of families found comfort, a place where kindness was expected, where children were meant to be safe. The man at the center of this spiritual community was Reverend Samuel Albright. At 47, he wore his age lightly, his hair silver at the temples, his voice even and reassuring, a presence that soothed the nervous and inspired the troubled. Albright had arrived in Springfield over a decade earlier, quickly earning the nickname the Father of Springfield for his open-door policy, his tireless charity work, and his easy rapport with children. He led by example, picking up litter on Main Street, organizing food drives, and volunteering at the hospital. His sermons, gentle but firm, drew crowds who hung on every word. Each weekday morning during summer, Reverend Albright drove his olive-green Chevrolet Caprice through the neighborhood, picking up children for the Bible school program. His car became a familiar sight, often filled with laughter and music, the windows rolled down, Albright himself waving at parents from behind the wheel. For many families, trusting him with their children was second nature. After all, he was the one who counseled couples through grief, who visited sick neighbors at midnight, who reminded everyone of the goodness at the heart of their town. But as the hours ticked by after Abby's disappearance, small details began to replay in the minds of those who knew him. There was the mother who remembered how Reverend Albright always insisted on walking girls to the parking lot himself, promising parents he'd keep an extra eye out. There was the teacher who recalled the Reverend staying behind after lessons, alone with the youngest children, his voice echoing down empty hallways long after everyone else had gone home. Still, suspicion was slow to take root in Springfield. In a community where faith and trust were as reliable as the sunrise, doubting a man like Albright felt as unnatural as doubting the gospel itself. The town clung to its rituals, casseroles brought to the Whitakers' porch, prayer circles in the church basement, handwritten notes slipped beneath Caroline's door. The community moved as one, its grief and fear binding neighbors together even as uncertainty crept into every conversation. Yet beneath the surface, the question simmered. How well did anyone really know those who walked among them? As the sun sank behind the chapel spire and the town was cast in the long shadows of a summer evening, Springfield held its breath. Doors were locked that had never been locked before. Porch lights flickered on in broad daylight. In homes across the county, parents pulled their children closer, whispering silent prayers that the ordinary world they loved had not been lost forever. Faith Hill Chapel remained open late, its sanctuary glowing with candlelight, as friends and strangers alike gathered, hoping, praying, and waiting for news of Abby Whitaker, the little girl in the blue ribbon who vanished on a morning that should have been like any other. July 23, 1999. By 8:15 in the morning, the hum of the township had started to rise, filling the air with the sounds of early summer, lawn sprinklers ticking, birds chirping in the maples, the faint echo of a neighbor's radio playing a pop song just out of reach. At that hour, Abby Whitaker made her way down the sidewalk, her polka-dot dress fluttering, her backpack bouncing lightly with every eager step. She clutched her children's Bible, the blue ribbon in her hair glinting in the sunlight. For a few passing moments, the only witness to her presence was Jacob Turner, watering his rose bushes. Turner paused, offering a gentle wave, and Abby grinned back, her energy bright as always, before continuing down the block. That, as later records would confirm, was the last certain sighting of Abigail Whitaker. The sun had barely lifted above the treetops, but the entire course of one family's life had already been altered. At Faith Hill Chapel, Mrs. Rachel bustled around the recreation room, arranging chairs and setting out colored pencils for the children's Bible lesson. Each passing minute, she glanced out the window, expecting to see the flash of Abby's blue ribbon, that familiar rush of footsteps. As the clock neared 9, other children trickled in, some with parents in tow, others in clusters, laughter bubbling in their wake. But Abby did not arrive. At home, Caroline Whitaker stacked loaves of fresh bread for the bakery, every so often glancing at the kitchen clock and picturing her daughter already busy helping at church. The sense of order, that delicate framework that held the family together, remained undisturbed for now. 9 o'clock came and went. Inside the chapel, Mrs. Rachel's concern grew more urgent. She scanned the parking lot, checked the bathrooms, even called out Abby's name in the hallway, but no trace. After 15 anxious minutes, she excused herself from the growing bustle and hurried to the small church office. There, with a shaky hand, she dialed the Whitaker home. Caroline's heart began to pound the moment the phone rang. "Is Abby with you?" Mrs. Rachel's voice came through, taut and edged with fear. A chill swept through Caroline. The question, simple as it was, fractured the world she knew. Caroline stammered a reply, then dropped the phone and ran to the street, peering up and down the block, as if willing her daughter to appear. By 10:15, the Springfield Township police were notified. The news traveled with the speed and sharpness of a summer storm. Within the hour, the quiet suburb was transformed. Squad cars rolled slowly down Baltimore Pike, officers knocking on doors, neighbors emerging onto lawns, faces drawn with worry and disbelief. In kitchens and living rooms, phones rang and word spread. A child had vanished. By noon, dozens of volunteers, some still in pajamas, others hastily dressed, badges of community on their sleeves, gathered at the edge of Ridley Creek State Park. The search was frantic, methodical, desperate. Parents, teachers, and friends combed the woods, calling Abby's name, pushing through brush and brambles, hearts racing with every false alarm. A glimpse of pink in the undergrowth, the echo of a small voice that turned out to be the wind. Officers traced Abby's most likely route, down Springfield Road, past the creek, across the park entrance, stopping at every driveway and yard. Nothing. A search team ventured deeper into the woods, fanning out in lines, eyes scanning for anything out of place. Under the thick canopy of leaves, shadows played tricks on the mind. But then, just past a bend in the trail, a flash of pink caught an officer's attention. Abby's backpack, tossed into the brush. The find brought a hush over the searchers. The bag was opened carefully, revealing the small Bible, a colored pencil, and a note card with a simple message in a child's handwriting. Lesson 3. God's love is safe. The innocence of the words twisted the hearts of all who saw them. Rumors crackled through the crowd. Some remembered seeing a dark green Chevrolet sedan parked oddly near the wooded turnoff, the sunlight flashing off a polished chrome emblem. Others, in the confusion, struggled to recall any detail that might matter. The color of a stranger's shirt, a car door opening and closing, a face glimpsed from a distance. But no one could remember the license plate, and the memory would remain incomplete, a haunting fragment that eluded the grasp of certainty. As evening approached, the search continued, lanterns and flashlights pushing back the dusk. Caroline and Thomas stood at the periphery, hands clasped tight, their world shrinking to a single point of hope and terror. They watched as strangers, now bound by a shared dread, moved through the trees, every voice that drifted from the darkness a possible miracle or heartbreak. By midnight, the lines between neighbors blurred. A sense of collective loss hung over Springfield, heavy and oppressive. At the Whitaker house, the lights stayed on. At Faith Hill Chapel, candles flickered in the windows. Children were kept indoors. Parents watched the streets. And the story of the missing girl became the heartbeat of the town, a rhythm of fear, prayer, and the hope that Abby would come running home, the blue ribbon in her hair shining in the morning sun once more. But as that long day faded into night, Abby remained missing, and the question of what happened on that last, ordinary morning settled over Delaware County. Refusing to let go, night swept over Springfield Township, but no one truly slept. The search for Abby became relentless, a fever that overtook the quiet town and bound its people together with a single desperate purpose. The police worked alongside parents, teachers, and local volunteers. Flashlights bobbed through the tangled shadows of Ridley Creek State Park, the beams dancing like restless spirits between the trees. In the Whitaker home, a parade of neighbors brought food, comfort, and offers of help. But there was little to do but wait and pray. At Faith Hill Chapel, the doors remained open well into the darkness. Candles burned in the sanctuary, their flickering light reflected in the tear-streaked faces of friends and strangers kneeling in the pews. Whispered prayers rose to the rafters, mingling with the distant drone of police radios and the thud of boots in the undergrowth. Some clung to hope, others to each other. Everywhere there was a growing sense that something irrevocable had changed. The panic spread beyond the chapel, riding the airwaves as local news crews arrived. Camera lights cut through the gloom outside the Whitaker home. Microphones were thrust toward neighbors and officers, and the story unfolded live on television screens across Delaware County. The image of Abby's smiling face, blue ribbon, shining eyes, became impossible to escape. The town's collective grief and fear were put on display for the world. On the second night, exhausted searchers still moved through the woods, calling Abby's name into the darkness. In living rooms, parents held their children closer. The illusion of suburban safety shattered. The community's routines, morning jogs, afternoon errands, children's laughter in the park, were suspended. Every stranger's face drew suspicion. Doors that had never been locked were now bolted tight. Inside the chapel, Reverend Samuel Albright presided over the nightly vigil, his calm presence a balm to the frayed nerves of Springfield. He stood before his congregation, voice gentle but commanding, hands folded as he led prayer after prayer for Abby's safe return. The sight of the Reverend, tears glistening on his cheeks beneath the candlelight, moved many to weep. To some, it felt as though faith itself were being tested, an ordeal not just for the Whitaker family, but for the entire town. Outside, the murmurs began. It was subtle at first, a mother recalling the time Reverend Albright had insisted on giving her daughter a ride home after an event, the memory surfacing in the uneasy silence that now haunted every conversation. Another parent remembered him staying late after Sunday school, alone in the empty building, his silhouette visible through the frosted windows as children's voices faded down the steps. These recollections, harmless on their own, gained new weight in the anxious darkness. No one dared say these things aloud. Not yet. Albright was the father of Springfield, a man who spoke of redemption, safety, and grace. He was trusted, loved, a fixture in every milestone the community celebrated. The idea of suspicion was nearly blasphemous, but as the days stretched on and Abby remained missing, the first cracks in the facade appeared, quiet but impossible to seal. On the third night, a thunderstorm swept through Delaware County, sending sheets of rain lashing the chapel windows. Still, the lights remained on, and people huddled together in the sanctuary, praying over cups of lukewarm coffee and the steady sound of rain on the roof. The Reverend's words were broadcast on local TV, a plea for unity, for hope, and for compassion, not only for Abby, but for the soul of whoever led her astray. For many, his voice brought comfort. For a few, it stirred a faint unease. Despite exhaustion, the search continued. Volunteers sloshed through mud and tangled underbrush, undeterred by the storm. Police dogs barked at hidden scents. Officers marked each piece of evidence with grim precision. In the forest, Abby's absence echoed louder than any shout. Rumors grew, whispered in kitchens and behind closed doors. Was Abby still alive? Had someone in their midst betrayed the trust of the town? Theories multiplied, each more chilling than the last. People replayed every recent interaction, looking for the detail they'd missed, the warning sign they'd ignored. Yet Springfield was bound by its faith. Each night, the pews of Faith Hill Chapel filled again. People prayed not only for Abby, but for deliverance from the fear that now shadowed every corner of their lives. The Reverend stood at the altar, leading his flock, his words ringing through the night. Let us pray for Abby, and for the soul of whoever led her astray. In that summer of sleepless nights, the hope for Abby's return flickered like the chapel candles, sometimes bright, sometimes almost extinguished, but never entirely gone. Springfield Township waited, watched, and prayed, holding on to faith as the world they knew slipped farther away. And beneath that fragile hope, doubts quietly took root, unnoticed by most, impossible to unsee for those who had begun, at last, to question. As dawn broke over Springfield Township on the fourth day of Abby's disappearance, a sense of numbness settled over the town. Fatigue weighed on every face. The search parties had thinned, hope dulled by sleepless nights, replaced now by the slow grind of investigation. At police headquarters, a wall of photographs and handwritten notes grew larger with each passing hour. Maps were covered in pins. Timelines sprawled across whiteboards. The sense of urgency, so fierce at the start, was now shaded by dread. Police worked methodically, following every thread. Interviews filled the small, fluorescent-lit rooms of the station. Neighbors, friends, teachers, anyone who might have seen Abby that morning. Each recalled the ordinary details: the time she left home, the sound of her laughter, the familiar flash of her dress. But nothing led them closer to the truth. Reverend Samuel Albright arrived for questioning in a suit, his face drawn and eyes bloodshot. He sat across from the lead detective, hands folded, his manner steady. Calmly, he explained that he'd been late that morning, delayed by a flat tire near his home, and that he hadn't seen Abby at all. The police pressed him, his routine, his whereabouts, the children he picked up each day. Albright's answers never wavered. When asked about his car, he handed over the keys without hesitation. Officers scoured the green olive Chevrolet Caprice from bumper to trunk, checking every crevice, dusting for fingerprints and fibers. They found nothing unusual. No sign of Abby, no trace of violence, nothing to tie the car to the wooded turnoff near Ridley Creek. Whispers in the station grew as investigators compared notes. Some wondered about the Reverend's history, his reputation for kindness, his proximity to the missing girl. But the lack of evidence stifled any accusation. It seemed easier, almost necessary, to believe that the trusted shepherd of their community could not be involved. Attention shifted briefly to another possible lead: a transient living in the woods near the park, a man seen scavenging near the trails. Police brought him in for questioning, combed his camp for clues, and cross-checked his alibi. After several tense hours, he was released, his connection to Abby's disappearance ruled out by lack of evidence and witness statements. Time dragged on, the unanswered questions piling up. The Whitaker family was left in limbo. Caroline moved through each day as if underwater, every motion deliberate, every word heavy. Thomas returned to his job at Boeing, but found it impossible to focus, his thoughts consumed by guilt and helplessness. Friends and neighbors kept vigil on the porch, meals left untouched, sympathy and sorrow filling the silence. And then, on a brisk October morning, 78 days after Abby vanished, the story changed forever. It was a jogger who stumbled upon the scene, just off a secluded trail in Ridley Creek State Park. The runner, drawn by the glint of something pale among the leaves, froze as realization dawned. Police arrived within minutes, cordoning off the site, working quietly and swiftly beneath a canopy of bare autumn branches. There, half hidden in the underbrush, lay the small, lifeless form of a child. Abby Whitaker's dress was still white, though soiled by the damp earth, and her clothes had been folded with strange care beside her. In the chilling stillness, there were no immediate answers, only the overwhelming sorrow that finally, after weeks of agony, the question of Abby's fate had been answered. The discovery sent shockwaves through Springfield. News trucks crowded the park entrance. Reporters hounded the police chief for statements. A community that had clung to hope was suddenly submerged in grief. The Whitaker family, their faces wan and drawn, received the news from detectives who had run out of ways to soften the blow. The pain in their eyes was reflected across every face in town. An autopsy was conducted at the county morgue, the report as sterile as it was devastating. No signs of sexual assault, but clear evidence of blunt force trauma to the head. The details left more questions than answers. Who could do such a thing, and why? Theories surfaced, each more desperate than the last, but none could blunt the horror of loss. That week, the chapel pews filled as never before. The town gathered in stunned silence for the memorial. At the entrance of Faith Hill Chapel, a small marble angel appeared, placed by hands unknown. Flowers were piled at its base, prayers scrawled on scraps of paper and tucked among the petals. On Sunday mornings, the sanctuary felt colder, every hymn weighted by the memory of the little girl with the blue ribbon who would never return. In the months that followed, routines slowly resumed, but the old sense of safety was gone. Parents watched their children more closely. Strangers were eyed with suspicion. Abby's story lingered, on playgrounds, at kitchen tables, in the quiet hush before bedtime prayers. And as autumn turned to winter, the question of justice, of who had taken Abby and why, echoed in Springfield's heart, unanswered and relentless. After Abby Whitaker's funeral, life in Springfield Township never truly returned to normal. For weeks, the townspeople moved with the sluggishness of grief. The marble angel outside Faith Hill Chapel gathered petals and handwritten notes. But as days slipped into weeks and months, the crowds around it thinned. The school year began. Halloween decorations appeared. Thanksgiving came and went, each season pushing the memory of that terrible summer a little further away from daily conversation. Inside the Delaware County Police Station, Abby's file took its place among a growing number of unsolved cases. The evidence, sparse from the start, seemed to wither with time. No DNA, no clear suspect, no motive, just a few haunting fragments. A pink backpack, a note card with a child's handwriting, the memory of a green sedan glimpsed through sun-dappled trees. The investigation, once burning with urgency, slowly cooled. Detectives transferred, priorities shifted, leads dried up. The Whitaker case became just another folder, its tab labeled "Missing, Deceased," its secrets pressed flat between the pages. The Whitakers tried to hold on. For months, Caroline baked for the church, attended prayer circles, and filled her kitchen with the aroma of cinnamon and sugar, as if sweetness could somehow chase away the bitterness of loss. Thomas returned to work but never found the old rhythm. He grew quiet, his eyes distant, his hands often trembling. Their home, once the center of neighborhood life, grew silent. Friends tried to offer comfort, but there were no words for such a wound. Every corner, every echo in the hallway, reminded them of Abby. In the spring of 2001, almost 2 years after Abby's disappearance, the Whitakers made the difficult decision to move to Ohio. They told themselves it was for a fresh start, for new opportunities. But the truth was simpler. They could no longer bear the memories that haunted every street, every tree, every sunrise over Springfield Road. Their departure was quiet. The house was sold, the yard cleared, the swing set taken down. Neighbors watched from behind curtains as the moving truck rumbled away, carrying with it both sorrow and a sense of finality. Faith Hill Chapel pressed on, its congregation diminished but determined. The summer Bible school program resumed, though the laughter of children was never quite as unguarded as before. Parents lingered longer at drop-off and pickup, casting wary glances at familiar faces. Conversations about faith now ran side by side with anxieties about safety. The marble angel weathered another winter, its features softened by snow and rain, a silent witness to all that had changed. Reverend Samuel Albright continued to serve, his presence as steady as ever, but something beneath his calm exterior seemed altered. The Reverend's sermons grew more solemn, his eyes sometimes distant. He visited parishioners, prayed at hospital bedsides, and organized food drives as he always had. But those who watched closely noticed the change, a stiffness in his shoulders, a tremor in his voice. Perhaps it was only the weariness that comes with leading a grieving flock. Or perhaps it was something deeper. Then, without much warning, Reverend Albright announced his resignation. He had accepted a position at a riverside church in Savannah, Georgia, he said. An opportunity to reach new souls, to heal in a new setting. The news was met with a mix of relief and sorrow. Some wept as they hugged him goodbye. Others watched in silence, weighed down by unspoken questions that no one was ready to voice. On his last Sunday, Albright stood beneath the chapel's high windows, sunlight pooling at his feet, and spoke of faith, forgiveness, and the mysterious ways of God. When he drove away in his olive-green Chevrolet Caprice, the sound of his departure lingered in the air like the final chord of a hymn. With the Whitakers gone and the Reverend's shadow receding, Springfield slowly rebuilt itself around the gap Abby had left. But the story did not disappear entirely. Each summer, on the anniversary of her disappearance, a few townsfolk gathered by the angel statue. They lit candles, whispered prayers, and spoke Abby's name aloud, refusing to let her memory fade completely. For most, life pressed forward. Children grew up, houses changed hands, the town calendar filled again with birthdays and block parties. Yet the old wound remained, healing at the edges but never fully closed. In a forgotten corner of the Delaware County evidence vault, Abby's file grew dusty. Detectives new to the force glanced at it occasionally, reading the yellowed clippings, the faded case notes, the sketch of a green sedan with no license plate. Each year, fewer people remembered the little girl with the blue ribbon. Each year, the pain became less sharp, but the mystery endured. Sometimes, when the wind stirred the leaves in Ridley Creek State Park, or the church bells tolled on a quiet Sunday, those who had lived through that summer felt a familiar ache. They wondered, just for a moment, if someone, somewhere, still carried the answer to the question that had haunted them for so long. But as time passed, even the most persistent doubts seemed to settle, buried by the ordinary rush of life, as Springfield Township moved forward, carrying its secrets in silence. March 2021 brought the first thaw of spring to Delaware County, the kind that wakes old memories and stirs up the dust of years gone by. For most in Springfield, Abby Whitaker's name had faded to a somber echo, an unsolved heartbreak, mentioned only in whispers at the annual candlelight vigil. But for others, the ache of that summer never dulled. Among them was Rebecca Hanlon, once Becca to those who knew her best, a girl who, at 9, had sat beside Abby in Sunday school, and who had spent 2 decades running from a memory she had tried to bury. It was a gray, blustery morning when Rebecca, now 36, walked into the Delaware County Police Department, clutching an old marbled notebook to her chest. She looked worn, her hair streaked with early silver, her eyes older than her years. She had moved away, built a life of quiet routines, but nightmares had followed her through every season, refusing to let her forget. That morning, she had woken from another restless night, her heart hammering with the realization that the past would never let her go until she faced it head on. Inside the station, Rebecca sat across from a detective, hands trembling as she slid the diary across the desk. Its pages were warped with time, the cover faded and frayed, but inside were the secrets of a frightened little girl. One page, marked with the year 1999 in careful, shaky pencil, read, "Mr. S. said don't tell anyone about the car. God will be sad." Her handwriting was small, the letters uneven, but the meaning was unmistakable. Rebecca's voice faltered as she tried to explain the weight behind those words. All those years ago, Reverend Albright, Mr. S., as she called him in the diary, had offered her a ride home after Bible school. She remembered the way he smiled, his gentle tone promising a special lesson on faith. The details after that were fragmented. The sound of the car door closing, the way her stomach twisted with dread, the silent prayer she whispered as they pulled away from the curb. At the last second, a panic she couldn't explain had overtaken her. She'd begged to be let out near her own street, inventing a story about a forgotten errand. He'd relented, and she'd run home, heart pounding, never speaking of it to anyone. She had locked that memory away, convinced that it was just a child's wild fear, that it meant nothing. But Abby's disappearance happened only a week later, and in the years that followed, Becca grew to understand the shape of her own terror. Now, finally, she was ready to trust the memories she had been too afraid to share. The detective listened closely, the details slotting into place like pieces of a puzzle long thought unsolvable. With Rebecca's statement, the Whitaker file was reopened for the first time in decades. Old evidence was retrieved, case notes reviewed, faded photos and forensics examined under the light of new technology. Among the few remaining pieces of physical evidence was a single strand of hair, preserved in a small plastic envelope, lifted from Abby's coat at the time, tested and catalogued, but ultimately set aside when the science of 1999 offered no answers. In 2021, DNA testing had advanced by leaps and bounds. The strand of hair was sent to the state laboratory, the process painstaking and slow, each day stretching the nerves of those involved to a breaking point. For weeks, detectives waited, barely daring to hope. Meanwhile, the town of Springfield buzzed with rumors, the old grief surfacing, parents and teachers reliving the fear and confusion of that long-ago summer. Some dismissed Becca's story as the product of trauma. Others watched the news with haunted eyes, wondering if the truth they had tried to bury would finally come to light. The results arrived in early May, a revelation as shattering as it was definitive. The hair found on Abby's coat was a match for Reverend Samuel Albright. After all these years, a name emerged from the shadows. The man who had preached safety, who had comforted the grieving, who had driven children through sunlit streets in his green Chevrolet. He was now the prime suspect in the crime that had haunted Springfield for a generation. The news ricocheted through the town like a thunderclap. Some refused to believe it, clinging to memories of the man who had baptized their children and buried their dead. Others felt a cold sense of vindication, recalling whispered doubts that had never dared to surface. Rebecca Hanlon, for her part, felt a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. Relief that her story would finally be heard. Sorrow that it had taken so long. Detectives packed their bags and headed south, following the trail to Savannah, Georgia, where Albright now served a new congregation by the river. The past, long buried, was coming for him at last. And as the sun set over Delaware County, the people of Springfield waited, breathless, anxious, and filled with questions, wondering if the answers they feared and hoped for would finally be delivered after all these years. May 2021, Savannah, Georgia. The air hung thick with the scent of river mud and magnolia as detectives from Delaware County knocked on the parsonage door. The house was modest, set back beneath a canopy of live oaks, Spanish moss drifting in the muggy breeze. Samuel Albright answered with a blank expression, his once silver hair now almost white, his shoulders stooped beneath the weight of years and secrets. Wordlessly, he allowed himself to be handcuffed and led away. Congregants watched in disbelief from behind curtains and screen doors, the scene unfolding with quiet, terrible finality. To them, Reverend Albright was still the gentle voice who had married couples, visited the dying, prayed with the lonely. The idea that he could be connected to the infamous cold case from Pennsylvania seemed unimaginable, a cruel trick played by the universe or a mistake soon to be corrected. But back in Delaware County, as news cameras crowded the courthouse and headlines splashed across every screen, the collective denial began to splinter. The evidence was presented. A childhood diary unearthed after decades, a single strand of hair, the words of a survivor who had spent her adult life wrestling with memories that would not let her rest. When Albright was brought back to Pennsylvania for questioning, he refused to speak for hours, his face a mask, hands folded tightly, eyes fixed on the gray table before him. It wasn't until detectives slid the battered diary across the table, Rebecca's words, written in the fragile, trembling script of a frightened child, that something inside Albright finally broke. His lips parted, voice rough with age and something deeper. "I just wanted to calm her. She screamed. I lost control." The words slipped out almost as a whisper, a confession that left the room stunned into silence. The man who had once commanded the faith of an entire town was now revealed as the author of its greatest tragedy. News of his confession spread quickly, leaving Springfield and Savannah reeling. Some clung desperately to the belief that Albright had been coerced or framed, that the details were wrong or misunderstood. Old friends defended him in letters to the editor and on talk radio, pointing to decades of kindness, charity, and unwavering service. But others could not ignore the flood of uneasy memories that suddenly made new, chilling sense. Former students, grown now, many with children of their own, began coming forward with stories that had long seemed too confusing or insignificant to share. There was the way he lingered after class, the lingering touch on a shoulder, the odd request to help clean up alone in the church basement. Incidents dismissed as quirks or isolated lapses took on a darker meaning in the harsh light of truth. The town's faith in itself was shaken to the core. When the trial began that winter, the courthouse filled with reporters, townsfolk, and those who had traveled from across the state just to witness the reckoning. Thomas Whitaker sat in the front row every day, Abby's photo clasped in hands made rough by time and sorrow. Caroline, her face lined with grief, wore Abby's blue ribbon pinned to her blouse. When the prosecutor held up the small, pink backpack and the Bible that had been found in the woods so many years before, the room was silenced by a wave of collective pain. Albright's defense tried to sow doubt, raising questions about memory and evidence that had aged and faded. But the jury listened to Rebecca Hanlon's testimony, to the experts who matched DNA, to the aching silence of a community that had lost its innocence. The verdict, guilty on all counts, brought little comfort, only a measure of justice decades delayed. Reverend Samuel Albright was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, his fate sealed in the courtroom, where, for a brief moment, the truth had broken through the fog of years. Outside, at the press conference that followed, the sheriff's words cut through the crowd. Sometimes the devil wears the robes of the faithful. Reporters scribbled furiously, but for many in Springfield, the sound was like a bell tolling for everything they had believed, everything they had trusted. In the months that followed, the town tried to make sense of the wreckage. The marble angel outside Faith Hill Chapel became a shrine anew, its base crowded with fresh flowers, teddy bears, and the handwritten prayers of a new generation. Parents held their children closer. Conversations about trust and secrecy became urgent and raw. Old friends and neighbors wrestled with regret. How had they missed the signs? How could faith be twisted into something so cruel? Yet, even as the pain lingered, there was a slow, tentative healing. The community came together, not around the myth of perfection, but around the hard work of truth and vigilance. Former students found comfort in sharing their stories, long-hidden secrets given the dignity of daylight at last. And in that winter, as snow fell over the rooftops and the chapel bell rang on Sunday mornings, Springfield learned that sometimes healing begins only when the darkness is finally named and faced. The trial was over, the verdict delivered, but the echo of Abby Whitaker's story continued to ripple through Delaware County and beyond. News crews packed up their cameras and left. The courthouse emptied, and the winter air pressed in close, heavy with relief and exhaustion. For Springfield, life would never quite return to what it had been before. Yet in the aftermath, there grew a kind of quiet resolve, a communal promise that the pain would not be forgotten, nor the lessons lost. In the months after Albright's sentencing, neighbors and families who had once watched their children skip down Baltimore Pike began to talk openly about fear and faith, secrecy and silence. Conversations, once kept behind closed doors, now unfolded in living rooms, classrooms, and around dinner tables. For some, the reckoning brought a cleansing clarity. For others, it only deepened the ache of betrayal. Still, there was an understanding that the truth, no matter how long it takes to emerge, remains the only path forward. Abby's story, though fictional, held within it the real and wrenching memory of another child lost in Delaware County decades earlier. In 1975, Gretchen Harrington vanished as she walked to Bible school, just as Abby had in the story. The search was relentless, hope sustained for weeks, and then 2 months later, her small body was found in the woods. That case haunted the community, casting a long shadow over the years that followed. The real Gretchen's disappearance had many of the same elements as Abby's: a sunny morning, a trusted community, a sense that safety was a given, not a privilege. Rumors circulated, tips were chased, suspects questioned, but no arrest was made for decades. The case gathered dust in police files while families mourned and neighborhoods changed. People told themselves the world was safer now, that such things belonged to another era, even as they locked their doors and held their children closer. Nearly 50 years after Gretchen's murder, a former pastor was charged in connection to the crime. Headlines flashed, old wounds reopened, and hope was stirred that justice, though long denied, might finally arrive. But the legal process proved difficult and fragile. Evidence had faded, memories blurred, and ultimately, the man was acquitted. The real case, unlike the story of Abby Whitaker, remains one of Delaware County's most haunting unsolved mysteries. Still, the memory of Gretchen, and of children like her, endures in ways both seen and unseen. Each year, families gather at the park where her body was found, lighting candles and leaving flowers by a simple memorial stone. Some bring letters, drawings, or tiny treasures: a teddy bear, a painted rock, a ribbon tied in blue. Others come simply to bear witness, to say her name out loud so it is not lost to time. For the families left behind, there is no closure, only the daily work of carrying forward, honoring the lives interrupted, and nurturing the kind of community where the vulnerable are watched over and darkness is not allowed to thrive in silence. Parents teach their children new rules: to speak up, to question what feels wrong, to understand that kindness never requires secrecy or fear. Schools invite speakers, churches open their doors to hard conversations, and in the smallest gestures, a hand held, a prayer whispered, a promise made, the town stitches itself back together, thread by thread. Reporters and true crime writers return from time to time, hoping for a new lead or a dramatic break. For them, the story is a puzzle to be solved, a headline to chase. But for those who lived through it, the story is more than a mystery. It is a scar and a lesson, a source of sorrow and a rallying cry for vigilance and compassion. In her own way, Abby Whitaker became a stand-in for every child whose name is etched into the cold case files of small towns across America. Through her story, Springfield Township grieved not only for what it lost, but for what it nearly allowed to go unseen. The memory of the blue ribbon, the polka dot dress, the child's Bible left in the woods became symbols, a call to never grow complacent, to never let evil pass unchecked simply because it hides behind a mask of goodness. Springfield moved forward, but not untouched. The marble angel outside Faith Hill Chapel remained, a sentinel through each season. Its white surface often streaked with rain or dappled with sunlight. New families came to the neighborhood, their children learning the story of Abby, then Gretchen, then the names of others lost in places not so different from their own. Each retelling was an act of remembrance, a way to say, "We will not forget, and we will not let this happen again." And somewhere, in homes across Delaware County and far beyond, parents sat with their children, holding them a little closer, teaching them to recognize the signs of danger, and to always believe that every memory, every child, deserves to be heard and never forgotten. In the quiet that follows tragedy, a community must decide how to live with what it has endured. In Springfield Township, the seasons cycled through again. Summers grew humid and lush, winters crisp and gray. Springs brought new blooms to the yards along Baltimore Pike. Yet beneath the surface, the story of Abby Whitaker became more than a cautionary tale. It was a quiet current, shaping the way people looked out for each other, the questions they asked, the trust they extended only with care. For the Whitaker family, the pain never vanished, though it changed shape as the years passed. They honored Abby's birthday in small ways: a blue ribbon tied to a tree, a candle burning in the kitchen window, a prayer whispered before meals. In Ohio, they found new rhythms: a different bakery for Caroline to pour her energy into, a quieter job for Thomas, where the noise of machines could not drown out memories. Every now and then, a stranger would recognize their names and offer sympathy, reopening wounds that had only just begun to scar over. But with time, they learned to carry Abby's spirit forward, They volunteered for missing children's organizations, spoke at community gatherings, and wrote letters to lawmakers urging stronger protections for vulnerable children. Their sorrow, transformed into advocacy, rippled outward, a legacy of resilience in the face of the unimaginable. In Springfield, Faith Hill Chapel remained both a sanctuary and a symbol. The marble angel at its entrance became a gathering place for those who needed to remember, to grieve, or to hope. On the anniversary of Abby's disappearance, the chapel filled with the soft glow of candlelight as families, neighbors, and even strangers gathered in silence. Some prayed, some sang, some simply stood with bowed heads. The ritual did not erase the pain, but it offered comfort in community, proof that Abby, and those like her, would not be forgotten. The lessons carved from heartbreak slowly became woven into the fabric of daily life. Parents walked with their children, teaching them not just how to cross the street, but how to trust their instincts and to speak out when something felt wrong. Teachers attended new trainings, learning how to spot signs of trouble and how to listen to even the quietest voices. Churches and youth groups reevaluated their policies, ensuring that transparency, accountability, and the protection of children became more than just ideals, but living, breathing practices. The media attention faded, but in homes throughout the county, stories of Abby and Gretchen Harrington, her real-life inspiration, continued to circulate. Gretchen's family, still carrying the weight of unanswered questions, saw in Abby's story a way for the world to remember not just their daughter, but the countless others whose names filled the unsolved case files. Through these stories, a call to action grew. Never allow silence to protect darkness. Never let trust become a shield for the unworthy. Never give up on justice, even when it feels impossibly far away. Sometimes, small gestures grew into powerful reminders. A child left a painted stone by the angel statue. A group of teens organized a fundraising walk for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. A teacher began every school year with a promise to her students that their safety and voices mattered. Each act, quiet but insistent, kept the memory of Abby alive. Proof that stories, even the hardest ones, have the power to change the world in ways both big and small. For some, too, the story ended in heartbreak. For others, it became the beginning of a deeper commitment to protect, to notice, to act when the world seems determined to look away. The townsfolk learned that evil often wears a familiar face. That courage sometimes means asking hard questions of those we trust most, and that healing is found not in forgetting, but in bearing witness together. Years later, a new generation of Springfield's children grew up hearing about Abby not as a cautionary tale, but as a symbol of innocence, hope, and the necessity of truth. They walked past the marble angel on their way to Sunday school, played beneath the same old maples, and learned from their parents and teachers how to recognize the signs of danger. In their laughter and in their caution, the story lived on, reminding the town that vigilance is the truest form of care. In the end, Abby Whitaker's story became a voice for all the children who never made it home, a testament to the power of community and a plea for justice that never sleeps. Her memory, and the lessons her story offers, are now woven into the conscience of a town forever changed. Some wounds, the town learned, can only be healed by truth. And so each year, as candles flicker and prayers rise, the people of Springfield recommit themselves, not just to remembering, but to action. They walk with their children, keep watch over one another, and refuse to let darkness go unchallenged, even when it wears a halo. And for those who believe that every memory deserves a voice, the story's final message endures. Stay vigilant, speak out, and help bring justice to stories that never found their ending, because every child's story matters, and every voice, no matter how small, deserves to be heard.